Before we get started, I want to share this quote by Sir David Attenborough. We're at a unique stage in our history. Never before have we had such an awareness of what we're doing to the planet, and never before had we had the power to do something about it than we did today. Nature once determined how we survived, and now we determine how nature survives. Education about what we have destroyed, and what we can and must regenerate could not be more timely and urgent. The priority now is in finding and implementing solution. And that makes this panel even more special, is because this panel, each of you are doing something that's delivering a solution. So that makes me want to start with Arielle. Why don't you tell the audience about your background, how you got started, what you do, and how does that align to solving for climate change?
I was raised resourcefully in West Texas, and I do think that that has lent a lot to my story and my mission. I was raised hunting and sewing my own food and clothes. We'll talk more about that in the sort of vegan side of things, but that was the real impetus for my interest in apparel arts. That's how I learned to sew. So by the time I got to New York, by way of fashion school in San Francisco, I had every aspiration to climb the corporate ladder of the fashion industry. And I did work for several major fashion houses. But then the farther I came, I just became more and more disheartened by the ethics of the industry. I just looked around and I realized at this scale, the whole point gets lost. I couldn't see the integrity or the beauty or the magic anymore in it. It just all felt like machinery. And so I pulled out. I went down to South America for a while, and I was learning there with some artisans and indigenous communities about how to be more regenerative in these ancient apparel arts. I was learning dyeing and weaving and beading, as well as plant medicine. Meditation and healing arts have been a really parallel facet of my journey, and in a way really inform my connection to sustainability, my definition of sustainability. Mm-hmm. So I eventually did come back to New York City, and I felt re-fortified, re-inspired to get back into the fashion industry and to contribute to what will inevitably be a revolution in the fashion industry. And I started my brand in early 2018 mm-hmm. with this commitment to regenerative materials and fair trade labor, local production, plastic-free packaging, plastic-free everything, really, as well as consumer education and climate activism.
That's incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Jean,
well, I grew up in Hollywood, California, in the hills near Griffith Park, and some of my early memories were of the harm humans were causing to other animals and nature. I remember this beautiful oak tree across the street from my parents' house that was cut down so the house could be made bigger. It just sort of viscerally bothered me. I remember a deer who was tangled in a chain link fence in a neighbor's backyard. And also on television, I was seeing wars and the violence humans were causing to each other, as well as what I had seen with the harm we were causing to the earth and other animals. And ultimately, I did not want to be a cog in a wheel of a system that was causing so much harm. So in high school and college, I started volunteering with human rights groups, environmental groups, and started to know activists, and I learned about factory farming. My grandmother was the first one to tell me about how veal calves are chained in crates for their whole lives, and I said, I'm never eating veal anymore. And it was a process of learning more about this industry and about the many harms it causes that led me to go vegan in 1985, co-founded Farm Sanctuary in 1986, and we felt it was important to see firsthand what was happening at farms, stockyards, and slaughterhouses. So we started going in to document conditions, and we would find living animals in trash cans or living animals thrown on piles of dead animals. So we started rescuing them. So we now operate sanctuaries for rescued animals in New York and California, where the animals are our friends, not our food. And we work on creating systemic changes as well as sort of cultural changes, changing how society views and treats farm animals. And I'm increasingly recognizing the need to look at systems, things like government subsidies that enable animal agriculture to continue, even though animal agriculture is inherently inefficient. For example, right now, the dairy industry, we have dairy farmers that are going out of business, but the government is giving them money every year to perpetuate this very unsustainable system. Even though we have like over 1 billion pounds of cheese in storage, we're spending money to make more cheese storage and giving dairy farmers money to make more cow's milk, which we don't need. So shifting these subsidies away from what they have been doing to enable a new kind of food system, I think there's a lot of opportunity. So I'm thinking a lot about systems and also the connection animal protection has with human well-being and the environment, because animal agriculture is one of the top contributors to the most significant environmental problems, including the climate crisis. Mm-hmm. Greta's a vegan, by the way. The Thornburg, who's out there pounding the pavement.
I'm curious what the title "Conscious of Food" movement means.
That was a Time magazine guy that came up with that, so I don't know exactly, but I think it's really the conscience. So you have a food movement that is evolving, and you have, in some cases, frankly, greenwashing, like with humane eggs or animal products, and really challenging that and saying less bad. If animals have more space, that's better than if they have less space. But ultimately, they're still killed and they're still exploited. So when I think of conscience, I think about really looking at things as they are and really trying to discern whether or not something is compassionate or whether it's harmful, whether it is a relationship with others based on mutuality and kindness, or one based on extraction and exploitation. So, and so much of, animal agriculture is kind of the epitome of extraction and exploitation of animals, of the earth, of workers, of consumers even, who are eating food that makes us sick. And then, of course, we need pharmaceuticals, who are very tied into animal agriculture. Most of the antibiotics used in the US are fed to farm animals to keep them alive and growing in these horrible systems. So I think it's really just looking at all these things and just encouraging people to act in a way that is aligned with their own values and interests. To me, that is key. And I'm not here to tell people what to do. Everybody has to make their own choice. But we should make informed choices. And I think most people would prefer to make choices that they feel good about, instead of saying, don't tell me I don't want to know about factory farming. I think most people would rather eat food that is nourishing instead of food that makes them sick, and would rather support a food system that's not destroying the planet the way animal agriculture does. 10 times more land in the US is used for animal agriculture versus plant-based. The Amazon's burning so we can grow feed for farm animals. So this is a system that is enormous harm. And I think most people would rather not contribute to it.
Well, you've done incredible work with revamping the food system and advocating for it. Jodi has a story behind creating a news platform. Do you want to talk more, Jodi?
Yeah, so I made the connection between eating animals and the ethical side of things, but also climate change maybe about 5 years ago. I was living in New Zealand at the time, so a big dairy country, and they eat a lot of lamb too, and veganism was just not a thing there at all. But yeah, it was very overwhelming for me as someone who always thought they were an environmentalist and someone who always loved and cared about animals, or at least I thought I did, until I kind of put two and two together with my actions and realized that I was not living in alignment with my values. And I found the change really quite overwhelming. I was consuming a lot of content, so documentaries, reading articles, and trying to really learn more and more about this way of living. And again, all of the content that I came across was negative. It was, whether it was pro-vegan or not, it was negative. It was judgmental. It was aggressive. It was angry, and it really felt quite toxic. I mean, I think that's the media landscape in general. It's full of perpetuating fear-mongering, and it doesn't make people feel good when they consume it. I didn't personally, it didn't resonate with me, and I come from a social media and media background, so it took me a few years. I tried blogging for a bit, and didn't really take off. but then a few years later, I moved to Vancouver, and I actually started working for a small VC company, and I was really inspired seeing all of these amazing startups that are passionate about tech and doing all these things. And I was like, well, I want to do something. I want to do something that makes a difference, though, and something that I feel really strongly about. And so whilst I was at my job, I kind of started building the Live Kindly platform. If anyone's vegan here, you know how passionate the vegan community is, and so many people were just offering their time to work for free. They wanted to build content, and they believed in the message. And the whole, idea of what Live Kindly is talking about veganism and plant-based in a way that is inclusive and welcoming and positive, and really empowering other people to make changes. We're not making content for a vegan community as such. It's really to speak to people who are curious about it and want to maybe implement aspects of that into their lifestyle or learn more about it. And And so I think that's probably why we've grown in such a short space of time to something quite big, and it's still growing. And I think it just resonates with a lot of people. Not everyone wants to have the vegan label, but a lot of people do want to live a kinder, more compassionate life. And I think it's very important to make that message accessible to people. And yeah, that's pretty much all we do, but it's working.
That's quite powerful, and even more inspiring is to hear that most, like a good significant number of your readers are non-vegans.
Yes,
right?
yeah. So from a survey that we took last year, about 42% of our readers said that they're not vegan. So I call them veg curious because I assume that's why they're reading the content. But yeah, that can be anything from like pescatarian, vegetarian, still eating meat, but like very much passionate environmentalists. And so I think it's really important that we create content that is going to be consumed by people who really are craving this awareness, but they want a safe space where they don't feel judged and they can actually learn and consume information without, going to the comment section and seeing trolls and feeling bullied and pressured. And yeah, I think that it's a positive sign to see that chunk of the audience engaging with this type of content. And it's changed so much in the last 2 years as well. I mean, the type of content that we were writing about just a couple of years ago is so different to now. I mean, even 2 years ago, I could never have imagined that Burger King would have a vegan burger. And it's crazy how much is changing so rapidly. And need to remind myself that it's not enough still, because you can kind of get consumed in this vegan bubble, I think, and feel like it's all happening now and we're living in a vegan world, but we're not quite there yet. So I'm still motivated.
Yep. Very cool. Turning to Liz, you've got a family history for generations making vegan candies, but was it always supposed to be that way? Was it a conscious choice? What else are you doing? We're curious to know.
Well, when my grandfather came over to the United States by boat in 1949, I don't think he knew what the word vegan meant. I think the term had just been coined in 46, actually. But the candy never contained any animal products, and I'm actually a 5th generation candy maker. And I was doing research for work at Smarties Candy Company. I was writing about the fact that the product happened to not contain animal products. Because consumers were asking us, is the product vegan? Is it vegetarian? We really want to know more about this. And so I was just thinking search engine optimization, which I think people in this room can appreciate. What are the keywords that I need to know about these topics? The only thing I thought I knew about veganism and vegetarianism was that it sounded like a terrible idea. Why would anyone not eat meat, dairy, and eggs? They taste delicious. So I walked in that day thinking, that's what I'm going to do, write out my FAQ and go have my turkey sandwich for lunch. And I stumbled across videos of how animals are raised and slaughtered for food. And I remember being horrified. It looked literally like a horror movie. Blood, screaming, use your imagination. Or take a look yourself, and thank you to the pioneers like Jean who actually have gone in and shot that video and shared that with us, because as Paul McCartney said, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, we would all be vegetarian. And I think that that's true, because when I faced the suffering that my food choices and my other choices was causing, I didn't want to cause that anymore. I didn't realize that I was funding that to happen. And so I felt ashamed, I felt sad, I felt angry, and I felt like giving away my lunch that day. So I did. And from then on, that was 2011. So yeah, we've been vegan ever since. I went home, I told my now husband, honey, I think I'm vegan now. Let's take a look at our fridge. And he was amazing. He said, well, it's a pretty vegan unfriendly world, so let's make the house this way to support you and your values, and I'm going to do my thing. And then 2 weeks later, he decided to change, and I shared the information with my parents, and they decided to change. I shared it with my grandmother, and she decided to change. And I thought, oh my gosh, all I need to do is just tell people, and they're going to change. This is so easy. I got this in give me a month. I've got this solved. And I was so wrong, as I'm sure you probably guessed. Not everyone wanted to hear that information. Not everyone wanted to change their behaviors. Food choices are so personal. personal. I get it. I love food. I love eating. And so from then on, it was kind of part of my personal life's mission to alleviate suffering. And to my mind, this seemed like a really effective way to do it. So in 2016, my husband and I started Millennium Capital. And we invest in businesses that create alternatives to traditional, outdated animal products. So rather than, feeding an animal and raising an animal and taking up the space for an animal and cutting down the rainforest for feed for that animal and great pasture for that animal, why not just go to the source? Why not just cut out the middle animal and eat plants? So that was our idea, and so we invest in businesses that create plant-based and cellular agriculture or clean meat products. And the clean meat cell ag products are not available on the market yet, hopefully soon, but the cost is coming down and it is scaling. And the plant-based products, many of them are on the market. We invest in very early stage. It's very, very risky, but I see this type of innovation as vital to moving the needle for taking animals out of the equation, out of our supply chain. They don't belong there. And when we're talking about sustainability, and you're here because you want to hear about sustainability, we can't talk about sustainability without talking about our consumption of animal products. It's practically impossible to talk about one and not the other because of the devastation that our food choices are causing, with over 40% of land mass going towards raising and slaughtering animals for food. Or if we think about food waste, I read somewhere that 27 calories go in to a cow to get 1 calorie out. And let's be conservative, let's say it's 20 calories in to get 1 calorie out. That's like going to a restaurant and ordering 20 meals and throwing 19 of them away. I mean, that's absurd. And yet, when we go to restaurants and we order, cow's meat, that's what we're doing. And, when we buy that gallon of milk, which, oh my gosh, I used to love drinking milk. Meanwhile, I happened to be lactose intolerant, like the majority of the world. I didn't realize that exactly. But, we buy a gallon of milk, it's 1,000 gallons of water. Now, let's say you've got a low flow toilet and you put a brick in the back. Good for you. You're doing all the right things. That's maybe a gallon per flush, right? If it's 1,000 gallons of water to get 1 gallon of cow's milk, that's like standing in front of the toilet and flushing it 1,000 times every time you purchase that gallon of cow's milk. Is that not a mind-blowing idea? And it's needless, and it harms us, harmed me, most of us to be drinking it. So yeah, I mean, I'm really happy to be here to be sharing my thoughts about innovation and how we can solve this, not just with our everyday choices, which hopefully we all feel empowered to be shifting our choices to be more sustainable, but also thinking about real solutions to serious life-threatening problems. We have this huge mass extinction happening in our lifetime, and we're endangering other species. Of course, we're endangering ourselves. Scientists are predicting that there will be practically no aquatic life in the oceans by 2048. Mm-hmm. And we're already seeing a huge crisis with fisheries. And so that's in our lifetimes, and it's something that we need to talk about, and I'm really happy to be here talking about it with you today.
Thank you, that's very inspiring. Jean, a question, because you've been doing this for quite a few decades now. How have you seen the narrative around climate change evolving? Have you seen some significant shift, and where do you see this going?
Yeah, I think there is much more awareness now about the contribution of agriculture to climate change than there's ever been before. A lot of this started around 2006 with a report by the UN called Livestock's Long Shadow. Mm-hmm. And in that report, they talked about how animal agriculture contributes more to the climate crisis than the entire transportation industry. So that kind of message started getting out. And then after that happened, animal agriculture came in and said, they started challenging them and trying to create confusion about, well, that number's too high. Although there's people at the World Bank that have numbers over 50% of greenhouse gases come from animal agriculture. So what is starting to happen now there are efforts in many cases to confuse when there is research that shows that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. And so same thing happened with the tobacco industry. So we're at this time now of ongoing research, but some of it is being funded by industries that want to maintain the status quo. There's a recent piece, I think it was in the New York Times. It was some researcher who's close to the meat industry who published a report saying eating meat is okay, and the New York Times published it because it was published in some journal that's very close to agribusiness. So there's starting to be a discussion of and a challenges to the science through creation of narratives. and greenwashing, and something we need to be mindful of. But if you just look at the evidence, it's obvious. And eating plants instead of animals makes all the sense in the world. And so people just need to do their own discerning and also look at the source of the information they're receiving.
And Jodi, have you also seen that sort of shift? Because it's not too long back that you started, but looks like Live Kindly is a hit. And how have you seen some of the top stories climbing?
Yeah, I think that for me, the thing that I've noticed the most is that we're actually having the conversation now, whereas it just wasn't happening before. And I think that's thanks to the internet, the fact that we can access so much information. Things are becoming uncovered with documentaries and just people sharing information and footage, things like that. So the fact that we're having this conversation, I think, is great. And, you know, whether or not everyone is aligned on that just yet, I mean, that hopefully will change. But I think it's really healthy that people are, for one, concerned about it, and two, willing to talk about it with other people and think about this as an issue that impacts all of us. So in terms of the narrative changing, I do see a huge shift in that. It's, as I said, the content that we produce has changed so much from the very beginning. When it was so exciting to talk about, you know, new plant-based options, and it still kind of is, but it's, and we're kind of going through this phase where it's, I guess, like a very hot topic, but now people are even more interested to learn why, and, you know, they have deeper questions. It's not just about, you know, oh, we can buy vegan, you know, meat now and it's easy, and that's all exciting to have all of these alternatives, which we didn't have before, but people are really asking deeper questions, and especially with climate change being, I mean, such a huge issue. It's always been. I think that people are starting to kind of connect the dots between that and then their personal ethics and then their health. It's all kind of coming together, which is good to see, because they're not isolated problems. Everything is connected, and I think it's just a matter of time. The more information we can consume, hopefully the right kind of information that's not influenced by industries, and it's just based on truth. People want to know the truth, and we can see the shift in just the way that people are supporting businesses in general. Like, people want transparency. They don't want to support businesses that don't align with their ethics, you know, whether that's fashion as well. It's not just about food, it's every decision you make. And so I think that it's really important that just thinking about that before making a decision is something that is happening more, and not for everyone, obviously, but it's I'm definitely seeing that change, and it's just exciting, as I said, to have that conversation happening when it wasn't before. So it's a huge difference.
You brought up a good point around aligning your values with what you're doing and reassessing that time and again, and helping, say, lean on some of the research or everything that you know is out there on the web to understand what's true and what's not. That brings me to thinking that Google, like, thinking about how our footprint also has an impact. Ever since 2007, and this is public information, we've been carbon neutral, and it's a hard thing to do. It's like a lot of investment in making sure every time we're depending on renewable energy, we're also like offsetting by investing in solar and wind somewhere else. And also sometimes like just promoting the idea of circular economy, because with data centers, with all our servers that we manufacture, we're now starting to use at least 20% of our old and refurbished material to build the new ones, and then selling at least 2 million worth servers out in the secondary market. And those kind of ideas around circular economy have started to kick in, and I really believe that the time for this idea has come. How do you see that coming into fashion, and is it here to stay, or what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, fashion is a major contributor to carbon emissions. The Sustainable Apparel Coalition rates it somewhere between 4th and 10th. And as far as plastic pollution, it's more like 2nd. And so it's also really hard to quantify, because there is a lot of overlap. Fashion is a very complex supply chain, and so it is also including transportation and agriculture, petroleum, cement and power for factories. And so technically, by reducing fashion's emissions, we'd also be reducing the emissions of the 9 other biggest polluters on the planet, and vice versa. There is a movement towards reducing emissions in fashion, but unfortunately it is a lot of greenwashing as well because of the popularity of carbon offsetting. A lot of fashion shows are promoting that they're carbon neutral, but it's all done through offsetting and not through direct reduction. And I just don't think there's any way we're going to meet the UN's 2050 carbon neutral goals without direct reduction. As far as fashion goes, we're currently we have a framework called the Higg Index, and that's rating us at, it's generated by a global industry-wide alliance for sustainable production. And it rates us at a 38 out of 100 right now as an industry for sustainability. That's up 6 points since 2017. But again, it's really hard to see if that number is truthful just because of the popularity of offsetting rather than direct reduction. Yeah.
So you see there's more room to be...
Absolutely, definitely. Food is way ahead of fashion. Fashion is really just undergoing its revolution. We have a lot of work to do. And I do look at the food industry for inspiration. I often educate my consumers, read the content label of your clothes just like you would the nutrition label. We do this constantly in the grocery store. We turn the package around and look at the nutritional label, but how often do you do that in the dressing room? Really, all the information you need to know is there on the label. It's going to tell you what it's made out of, if it's fair trade, where it came from. Shadow factories are a really big problem in fashion. That's why I do choose to work locally for production and keep the garment district alive is a really big incentive for me too. It was once the epicenter of American manufacturing, and it's really suffering for our cheap outsourcing of foreign production, which sometimes that's okay. There are responsible factories abroad, but it's really hard, again, with transparency to know what's going on. And with some companies do get themselves in trouble because of shadow factories, which is an issue where manufacturing gets contracted to a factory, say in China, and then they, without the company's knowledge, outsource it to another factory, which is usually penal labor.
Yeah, that's definitely grave, and that makes me think, is circular economy any better than when it comes to fashion? Should I be voting or rooting for companies like Rent the Runway? Because I'm not buying, I'm just like renting, and then that ownership piece really takes away the carbon footprint. At least that's my way of looking at it. Is that sustainable?
Secondhand fashion is definitely the most sustainable, absolutely. I'm using sort of borrowing from Michael Pollan's equation, wear real clothes, wear less of them, and mostly sustainable and secondhand. So a lot of us, myself included, I like to have something new every once in a while, and that's where sustainable fashion comes in. And again, we can incentivize a regenerative supply chain when we do invest in ethical companies. And the big company, H&M, Zara, Forever 21 might not notice if you pull out and you're not spending your money there anymore, but the small brands will. Small business will notice when your orders come in.
Yeah.
And that is incentivizing those regenerative practices. As far as circular goes, waste is certainly our biggest resource, not just in fashion, but across industries. The fashion industry is responsible for something like 92 million pounds of waste annually. It's massive. And so taking zero waste materials, there's so much innovation happening there. And we do start to see some great areas. A fabric that I'm using right now comes from runoff from dairy farms, from German dairy farms. It's spoiled milk left over from German dairy farms. They ferment it and then spin it into a fiber. So it's completely zero waste. It's biodegradable. I also view it as skincare. You know, I don't want to be having synthetics against my skin all day. We're just starting to learn the damage that microplastics are doing, not just for the planet, but for our own health. But then it's not necessarily vegan. So vegan is often a greenwashing term, actually, in fashion because it does rely on synthetics. So it's just, there's so much re-education that has to happen in order to make responsible decisions as a consumer.
And that was a very good takeaway, to really look at the label. I don't know how often we do that. I definitely most diligently do it when buying food products, even if that's at Whole Foods, but never to clothes. Just have a blank. And I know, Liz, at Smarties, you've recently invested in solar panels, and is there something going on? I know the concept of circular economy is not privy to just tech companies. How do you see your business and other businesses growing?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I straddle two spaces. On the one hand, I work at a 70-year young company that makes 2 billion candy rolls per year. And on the other hand, we're investing in startups that don't even have products on the market yet. So it's interesting to see the opportunity that there is for people who are building from the ground up versus the opportunity that there is taking on the mantle of something that's already well underway. And one of the obvious moves that we wanted to make, but it did take many years, it was a multi-year project, was putting solar panels on the roof in our New Jersey-based facility. And that took many years because this is a type of project where when you're putting solar panels on 90,000 square feet, you first probably need a new roof, especially when it gets destroyed during Hurricane Sandy, and then make sure that roof is secure, and then the panels go on, and that does offset half of our energy usage, which we're very proud of. We do run 24 hours a day, so that means that when the sun is out, it's about a 1-to-1 offset for our energy usage. Is it perfect? No, but it's definitely a big step in the right direction, and we're looking to do that in our Canadian facility as well. We have 2 factories. So yeah, sustainability is top of mind, and we're looking for more opportunities where we can make more sustainable choices and transform what we've already been doing, delivering a product that people know and love and want to stay the same. They feel very, very firmly about that. They want the same candy that they had when they were a kid, but they don't need to know that we're changing things on our end to make them more efficient and better made for them.
Yeah. And how you also mentioned you invest in impact-first businesses. How have you seen them succeed? What's the future of green businesses looking like?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I think about impact-first businesses in particular, we invest in companies where if they're successful, the very nature of their success means that people are going to be choosing their products over the animal alternative. So we're not interested in, say, a kale chip company, because whether someone chooses a potato chip or a kale chip is not going to move the needle in the way that we want to see. So for us, impact is success, and success is impact for these products that are strategically designed to displace animal products. So when we're meeting with entrepreneurs, if they say something to us like, oh my gosh, vegans are going to love this veggie burger. It's quinoa and azuki beans, and it's no oil, and it gives you all of your daily vitamins, and it tastes a little bit like dirt, but they're going to love it. And it's like, okay, meeting adjourned, go back to the drawing board and talk to me about how you're going to get this product into Burger King and McDonald's, because that's what's going to make the difference. Vegans, people who are making plant-based choices are already there. How are we going to reach people where they're at for the choices they're currently making so that they make the right choice easily and they're actually psyched about it too? So to me, it's just, it's so many wins aligned, and it's such an elegant solution too when you can create a product that people are choosing because it just is better, and it so happens that it's plant-based too.
And what's your perspective, Jodi? I'm curious because it's a first of its kind. Very few players out there that are plant-first, impact-first media publishing businesses. How do you see the future
Of media
like?
specifically, you mean, or?
Generally about these kind of businesses built around impact-first narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, and I think it's a sign of what people are actually looking for right now as well as a result of that. It's not just come from nowhere. I think that we're at this kind of time now where it's, people are, everything is really kind of split, and people are kind of, I guess, what I want to call it is like a rising consciousness. And so some people get very overwhelmed, I think, by the whole concept of sustainability, veganism, all of that kind of stuff, and it's too much, and you kind of just take a step back away from it. And then there's the other side, and I think, people become very overwhelmed by it in another way, and they can't do enough. And I think it's this kind of action that we're seeing that is driving that kind of change. And this is why I'm kind of doing what I'm doing, because the more we can influence those people to encourage other people rather than judge other people and kind of push them further away from that movement, the more we will see impactful businesses starting. And it didn't historically happen. Businesses were there to make money, and it didn't matter how. It was like, well, we're selling a product, and it doesn't matter, how we're going to do it ethically or sustainably or not. And now, like I said earlier, the fact that people, or at least younger generations, are wanting so much more transparency over where they are pretty much voting with their dollar. Businesses can't get away with doing these kinds of things anymore. You get called out on it, and people don't want to associate with those brands. So I think it's a sign of the future. I don't know how quickly it's going to happen, but I definitely don't see it going away, especially with new generations being way more woke than previous ones.
I like that. Thinking about now with everything you're doing and everything that you're fighting for, what in your eyes is success looking like?
Well, I'll say that the awareness certainly is raising, which is a beautiful thing, which again results in some of the pushback I mentioned about like the greenwashing and so on. But there is more awareness, there's more access to information, and the science is clearer and clearer. And the business community is really, I think, now starting to drive change in a big way, investing in solutions. You know, as an activist of many years, a lot of times we kind of get into the space of criticizing bad things. And it's important to criticize bad things, but it's really important to create alternative solutions. And I think that the business world is really doing that now. And you know, you can go to Burger King and get an Impossible Whopper, right, for example. And it's getting easier and easier to find plant-based foods. Now, these don't cause animals to suffer, so that's great. They're much more efficient ecologically, that's great. Health-wise, some are good, some are not so good. So it's really looking at these things and seeing them as they are, and then making mindful, thoughtful choices and informed choices. But I think most people, you know, do not want to support unnecessary cruelty, don't want to eat food that makes them sick, and don't want to support a food system that destroys the planet. So in the food space, there's more awareness and more opportunity as well to make choices that are more aligned with people's values and interests. So it's an exciting time, I think.
Yeah, certainly. And our to-do list is overwhelming in general. There is so much we want to do, including like people, all people who have gathered here to hear, listen, do more, what else can be done, because it's just not enough and we're not ready to take it. But that to-do list of, let me cut down on plastic, let me cut down on meat, let me do 100 other things. What, in your opinion, let's go around the table to see what is the top priority? How do you think as individuals today, going back, we can make a bigger difference than we did yesterday?
Mm-hmm. Specifically in fashion, but definitely across other industries as well, it really comes back to less but better, choosing just less in our consumerism. I think the capsule wardrobe is gaining popularity, which is really good for, and it's interesting to be in a consumer space and trying to sell things, but also telling people don't buy anything. So there's this balance that we're walking. And yeah, conscious consumerism also does get critiqued a bit by, you know, because of its, perhaps it's ineffective, but what being a conscious consumer has done for me, I am a zero waster as well, has, for one, I didn't want to contribute anymore to landfill crisis, just personally. And also, the unexpected result was that by unsubscribing from the status quo, I suddenly gained clarity back to the light. And I sort of forced myself into this resourcefulness that really birthed a lot of creativity for materials and just a new way of thinking of the world in general for me. So I know that is also a journey for people too. And as much as I do condone zero wasting or low imprint living, I also say climate action. I'm a member of CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby here in New York. They're a really wonderful way to get involved with lobbying. I'm a proponent of the carbon tax. It's a really great market-based solution for action that we can all support now. It's pretty easy to get involved. Of course, cutting out meat is also a major contributor of climate change, so that's an easy thing to get started with too. There's plenty of inspiration happening here. And buying fair trade is really important as well, so that we are revaluing our workers in garment, in the garment industry as well as in food. And the one thing too that I guess I'd like to impart is shopping locally, because I really don't think there's any reason for New Yorkers to shop on Amazon Prime. We literally live in Amazon Prime. So get out there and forage from your mom and pop shops and avoid the carbon emissions and wasteful packaging of shipping, and also invest in your local economy.
Good tips.
I think those are all really great suggestions, and I think the more distance we have between us and the companies we're supporting, the easier it is for those companies to maybe spin things in a way that isn't particularly accurate, right? And companies have a vested interest in making things sound really good, whether or not they are really good. So the closer you are to the source of your food or other items, I think the better. So being a conscious consumer, but also being involved in the political process, getting involved with organizations that are working on policy to move things in a better direction on the climate, or getting to know your elected officials. Democracy is a participatory sport. It's important to show up. And as aggravating as it can be to see sometimes what happens, it really is important to participate in the process and to express one's concerns in that, and for them hopefully to be included. If enough people speak up, things do start changing there. And continue to educate yourself. Look at various sources of information, talk to friends, share information, and spend time with folks who are also concerned about the same issues, and you can learn from each other and learn, for example, how do you make vegan lasagna? I mean, you can find that online now, but just, spending time with people that support healthy habits and then just build those more and more over time.
I think it's really important to not let the idea of perfectionism put people off. I know that it was one of the reasons that it took me so long to go vegan. I didn't think I could do it, so I just avoided the whole thing altogether for such a long time. And you'll hear many vegans say this, but once you do go vegan, it's probably one of the best decisions you've ever made. At the same time, the idea, if you are, if you're heavily eating meat right now and you just couldn't bear the idea of not having bacon for breakfast, if you can't change that right now, but you feel that you can change from dairy to oat milk, then do that, because that has a huge impact. And the more open-minded you are and the more you keep continuing to educate yourself, the easier all of these decisions become. So I think, historically veganism, whether you want to call it that or plant-based, has had this negative connotation with being very elite and not accessible, and that's true for people who are perhaps living in food deserts or in various other circumstances. But make change where you can, and just keep trying from there, and it does get easier. So I think that the more we can kind of just take a step back and not be so overwhelmed by people's judgment, and the more we can not judge other people, the easier it's going to be for everyone, and we can just kind of celebrate these small changes and just keep going in that direction.
Yeah, for me, there are 3 big takeaways that I think about, and one of them is so unpopular, so try to still like me after I say this. And it's the first one, too. I think for many of us, depending on who I'm speaking with, we can think about having smaller families. We can think about having smaller families, and I mean biological families, and for obvious reasons, with our human population growing at the rate it's growing, and natural resources being depleted at the rate that they're being depleted. So that's the first one. And there are lots of wonderful children looking for adoption too, so there's that too. The second one being making more plant-based choices. I don't expect everybody to go vegan. That was a real fit for me in my life and lifestyle, but I don't think that's going to be a fit for everyone. And like Jodi said, let's not let perfect be the enemy of the good. First of all, there is no perfect, all right? I drive to and from work every day. It's not perfect, but we can't let that be the enemy of the good. So, the more plant-based choices we can make, the better, and we can feel empowered about that and good about that and not judged about that. Next time you make a plant-based choice, if that wasn't the original choice you would have otherwise made, I am right there on your shoulder applauding you, okay? That's what's happening, so I'm right there with you. And then the third is, thinking about transportation a little bit differently. And so that may be, walking instead of taking a car or riding a bike. That might be doing more video meetings and fewer flying in, to meetings fewer times, or it might be going down a class in terms of just the amount of square feet that we take up when we fly. For those of us who may have the opportunity to fly in business or first class, we can choose to take up less space. I know, also unpopular, I get it, but we can choose to take up less space, and that does make a difference on long-haul flights. I know that I believe the Guardian's Foreign Office no longer flies people business and first class. I saw that announcement about that a while back. And it's something to consider. So, we have a lot of options, and we're very privileged to be having this conversation, and hopefully some of the things we shared will feel right for you.
Yep. Thank you. Those are great tips. We have audience questions.
Yes. Thank you all for being here. Really interesting talk. So my question, I guess I try, like you all say, to be a conscious consumer and conscious about what I'm choosing, but I'm very privileged to have the ability to make that choice. And you alluded to like food deserts before. Organic food is expensive. Fair trade clothes are expensive. So, and I appreciate there's a tension here and like a kind of a difficulty, but what are your all thoughts or solutions around that, where someone maybe doesn't have the choice to get the organic apple?
Just make the best choice that you can. I mean, I think it's ridiculous to expect that everyone can do that overnight. It's such a huge shift, and we're not living in a sustainable world right now. We're not living in a vegan world right now. This is why it's so difficult for people, and I understand that. At the same time, you know, when you are faced with that choice, you can always choose to make the most ethical choice that you can within your means. And so, you know, if you can't afford to buy organic, then don't, but buy a plant-based option. And, you know, I think the good thing is that these types of products are becoming more and more accessible, so it will get easier with time. It's not quite there yet. Mm-hmm. So it's very, very young in terms of the whole market, but it is getting easier. And I think it's just having that conversation with yourself in your head, you know, before you make that purchase. Is there something better that I could be doing with this money, you know, that's not going to put me in a difficult position? I think that's just something that, as I mentioned, it's a rising consciousness, and I think the more that we have that conversation with ourselves, the easier it's going to be. But again, like, I think it's that whole perception of perfection is what stops people doing anything, and that's what's more dangerous.
You know, I think a lot of times folks that don't have access to food are sort of, it's a systemic problem, yeah, right? Where they have certain areas, and then also on the other side, in terms of the expensive vegan food, you know, I sometimes joke about the vegan tax, right? You know, because if people can charge, you know, $5 for an apple instead of $3, they're going to do it, right? So that's just business and it's profit. But a lot of the reason that, you know, people don't have, in certain communities, don't have access to good food is because there's not money to be made there, right? So businesses don't go in, and the reason that like fast food and hamburgers are there is because of the government subsidies that make this food cheap, or soda pop with corn syrup, which is a byproduct of mass production corn that's grown for feed, right? So it's all connected to this whole system, which is incentivized by government programs. And so we need to start shifting those programs and incentivizing healthier food production practices. And there are some small positive examples. Like there's a group called Green Bronx Machine in the South Bronx, a teacher who started teaching his kids to grow plants in an area that didn't have a lot of access to good food. There's Harlem Grown that takes lots and starts growing food there. So I think utilizing assets in various communities like empty lots and creating opportunities for people to grow food are some small examples of some positive moves, and policy needs to encourage this. Like the city should encourage these lots to be used in these ways. So we have a long way to go, and you know there's a lot of injustice in our food system.
From a fashion perspective, I share a lot of the viewpoint of food, which do the best that you can, which for fashion that'll be secondhand. But also there's a big problem that we've had in fashion because of fast fashion, that clothes have been so deeply devalued. Our great-grandparents spent 10% of their income on their clothes and had less than 30 pieces. We're so far from that now. And if you spend $10 on a t-shirt, that means the materials cost $2 and the worker probably get paid even less. And skilled, sewing is skilled labor, if anyone has ever tried to sew anything before. It's not a minimum wage position. And so there's sort of that halfway meeting point. We need to incentivize it and also just revalue our clothes. And when we do have privilege and influence, we should use it for good.
Thank you again. All of your thoughts are really inspiring and empowering. My question is for Arielle. One of your comments really spoke to me around looking at the back of the label, and just the fact that it says vegan doesn't necessarily mean it's the greatest option, because it does have synthetics. So what would you recommend us to specifically look for or look out for when we are looking at labels?
Great question. Look out for, I really take the perspective of biodegradable materials, with the exception of recycled materials. So look for organic cottons, hemp, wild silks, recycled polyesters, and any cool new regenerative fabric that may be out there. And the brand will let you know, too, if they're doing something really cool. It will usually say something clever on the tag. Avoid synthetics that go under names like polyester, nylon, acrylic, polyurethane. Yeah, that's all plastic and never goes away.
Hi, thank you so much for teaching us so many different things. My question is, given that there's so much good information out there, but so many problems to solve, how do you balance learning with doing?
Well, there are some things most of us do every day, like eating. So, just starting to make choices that are more aligned with our values. So there's certain things we do every day, and sometimes a small tweak, like oat milk instead of cow's milk, for example, is a very positive doing, but I think you need to do them simultaneously. And as you do, you try the oat milk and say, I really love that, you're learning too. Or I don't really like that so much, so try the soy milk, or try, So you learn as you do, but so it's both, it's a combination.
Mm-hmm. Oprah, I think, said, when you know better, you do better, right? So you're here, you care, you're learning, you're about to leave this room, then what? And all our choices are worthy of consideration, and if we haven't considered some of them, now's a great time to reconsider it. I'm sure you came across this idea, especially now with the renewed focus on sustainability and climate change, that there really is no difference between someone who believes in climate change and a climate change denier if neither one of them are doing anything about it. And so I think it's up to all of us to re-examine our everyday choices and think about how we can tweak them to align our behaviors more with our values. And I highly recommend the book We Are the Weather that recently came out by Jonathan Safran Foer. One of the ideas that he proposes that I think is so interesting from a historic perspective is in World War II, the country made a great deal of sacrifices in order to support the war effort because the country was in threat and our freedom was in peril. Well, now here we are, and the globe, our Earth, is in peril, and are we going to make any changes or make any sacrifices? So I think, it's up to us to think about, future generations. Are they going to look back at us and just think, geesh, my great-grandparents didn't do anything about that. They just kept living the way they were living, even though they had the information, and now, X, Y, and Z is the result. And so, how do we want to be remembered? We're writing the story of our lives with every choice we make. And what's that story going to look like for you? And so I hope that feels empowering and not scary, because sometimes when we read the news, we feel like that's so far away, that's out of my control, I can't do anything about that. But all the things we're talking about are everyday choices that can make an enormous impact when they add up. And so, I encourage you to enjoy the experiment of shifting towards more sustainable choices.
One of my heroes, Yvonne Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, says, well, what else am I going to do, sit on my ass? We have to take action with truth. So we are intaking a lot of truth right now, and the goal is to be fearless with it. So hope is important, but Paul Hawken just said this in his book about climate change, that fear is the mask of hope. We actually need fearlessness right now, and fearless action.
The question I had, actually picking it back off of the individual over here about sustainability and the socioeconomics that are attached to it. And I was wondering, are there any programs that you guys are developing, creating, partnering to make sustainability, this budding industry, affordable for people? Because I feel like, I live in Brooklyn, it's a gentrified area, and you see some of the local people who live there, and they don't have the money to go to, Choice Market to get well-made food or bananas or anything like that. So I feel like at the end of the day, if they could make that decision, they would, which then would, when you're looking at the social determinants of health, would decrease healthcare and everything else and trickle down. So are there any programs? And if not, how do we partner with you guys to create these programs? Because like you said, we can't just sit on our ass. So thank you.
Not programs specifically that we're partnered with, but I would say that from my view of things, I think that it depends which way you look at adopting a vegan diet, because it can be really, really affordable. So it depends what you want to do. If you want to go out there and buy all of the alternative meats and the kind of fancy vegan cheeses and all of that, it's going to be expensive because it's all new and people are excited about it. And it's, I think that the way that you can do it is by eating more whole foods. So potatoes, rice, beans, veggies, they can be a lot more affordable. Maybe not if you're buying organic, but there are ways to do it. And I think it's more about having an open mind about those things, learning new recipes. And you don't necessarily need to transform your entire recipe. Like, if you're in the habit of eating certain meals per week, you don't need to change that completely. You can just find a plant-based alternative to it. So I think that it can seem scary and like it could be really expensive to do it if you're looking at it in terms of like I said, the new exciting vegan options out there, but there are ways to do it affordably as well. And I think it's always good to look within your community to find out whether there are other people with these kinds of initiatives, and learning from people and joining together. I think that I don't know about any personally, but I have heard about communities specifically in New York that are doing that, and growing your own food locally as well. If you have the space to do that, that's another way to make it a lot more affordable and accessible.
And sometimes things like dry beans are not that expensive, but it does then require cooking and time that goes into that. There's also some federal programs that make food accessible to people who need it. There's the Food Insecurity Nutrition Incentives Program under SNAP, where if people use SNAP dollars to buy fruits and vegetables, they get 2 for 1. So that's a very good example of incentivizing eating healthy plant foods. But it is a serious issue, and it's a systemic issue. And so there are some programs, there are some organizations working on it, but there's an awful lot more that needs to be done. And just a little story to kind of illustrate something about this. I live in the DC area, and there's some urban farming organizations, and I go to their meetings from time to time. And a woman that was speaking at it, as a journalist, she said she traveled around the world, saw many people who had had their limbs blown off in like mines and other like war zones. And she came to this community just outside of Washington, D.C., and there were a lot of people that had amputations. And she's thinking, gosh, a lot of these folks must have come from a war zone. They had diabetes, and they had their limbs amputated. So anyway, so this is a real thing. And so the health world are also areas, there's doctors that are working to help people eat plants, but a lot of it comes back to habits, and cooking potatoes instead of buying potato chips, and then having a place where you can buy potatoes affordably. And some of those SNAP dollars through Finney could potentially help. So it's a long, long process, but I think it's going to require communities and individuals learning from each other, learning healthy habits, and then creating systems that support healthy habits instead of the systems we have now that actually sort of subsidize the bad stuff.
Thank you. This was an incredibly amazing discussion. Thank you for taking our time. We'll get to the Jodi questions, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you.